to today's session. I'm Jake Berry. Been with JourneyTEAM for about 4 years now. I am Director of Inside Sales, so help with that team. But among many things, work with Nathan and his team quite a bit. So we'll dive into this. I'm going to just intro kind of JourneyTEAM, what to expect today, and then I'll kick it over to Nathan. So today, well, hopefully you're in the right place, but today we're focusing on achieve unlimited data greatness with external tools for Power BI. Hit next, make sure this works okay. And then, as you guys know, if you've probably been in a few sessions already today, it'll be recorded and then available to all of you. So, and then those that aren't here, they can also join later. So, all attendees will be muted. So, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'm sure you all know Teams or have used Teams, but there's just a little chat button at the top. Go ahead and use that, and then we'll respond more than likely at the end. We'll take a few minutes to answer questions that way, just to make sure we can get through it all. And then if you have any issues, connection problems, you can contact us right here at support@journeyteam.com. And then near the end of each session, we're going to send out a survey. I'll send out a link at the end, and you'll be entered into a drawing for an Amazon gift card that we do every hour, and then also for the new Surface 5 laptop. So lots to go out, and I'll take bribes. So if you have any ideas, I'll take bribes to rig the laptop drawing. Just kidding, I'll get in trouble. Take that off the recording. And then let's dive into a little bit about JourneyTEAM. So those of you that don't know, we've been around for about 29, going on 30 years as a company, and we're a full Microsoft stack shop, and we're about, we've grown quite a bit. We're over 130 team members, lots of projects, as you can see. We're a premier Microsoft Gold partner, so lots of referenceable customers as well. And then here's some of our awards. I won't bore you guys with this. Oh, I don't see. Nathan, do you see that? Is it showing up on your end with all the awards and everything we've been? There we go. Okay, cool. It's a double, triple click through. So we're with Microsoft's Inner Circle. That's basically their knit tight group. Out of the thousands of partners they have, we're kind of in that knit tight group with them. We've been Partner of the Year many years in the past, more specifically, directly with Microsoft, and then top places to work and so forth. So good place to be, lots of growth, lots of good things. And then lastly, I won't go through all this obviously, but again, we're a full Microsoft stack office, and we can work on the ERP side, the CRM side, cloud, collaboration and content, which is a lot of SharePoint and document management. Today's focus, data and BI, and then change management and adoption as well. So you can kind of see here we have these honeycombs that are basically showing that, how it brings everything into one. That's kind of Microsoft's vision, is to bring that entire stack to your business to help streamline processes and make life easier. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Nathan for the good stuff. I won't bore you anymore.
Thank you, Jake. That was great. You can hear me okay? Perfect. Well, I am so excited to be here today with all of you. My name is Nathan Gillian. I'm a business intelligence consultant here at JourneyTEAM, and I've been with JourneyTEAM about 3.5 years now. And I just can't emphasize how excited I am to have you all here. We are going to be covering Power BI external tools. Now, this is really just going to add to the knowledge that you already have about Power BI, and it's going to help make your reporting and analytics even better and easier to manage. With that, let's get started. So we're going to take a high-level view first of what external tools are, and then we're going to dive into 4 of the most common external tools. And remember, the goal here is for you to know how you can expand, extend, and exceed with these external tools, taking what you've already done in Power BI, or if you're just starting out, starting off on the right foot. So what are external tools? What do they do? They're meant to expand Power BI, and they come in 3 categories: semantic modeling, data analysis, and miscellaneous. Today, we're focusing on semantic modeling. And in case you're wondering, semantic modeling involves making changes to the metadata model that contains physical database objects that are abstracted and modified into logical dimensions. What does that mean in practical language? It essentially means that you're using these tools to change the formatting, organization, and structure and a little bit of the code of your tabular model that Power BI is built on. And remember, Power BI is built on a tabular model hosted in Azure in the background, right? So that's kind of what we're working with, is that tabular model. And when I say data model and tabular model, I'm meaning the same things. So those are interchangeable. Now, these tools enable enterprise-level report management capabilities. Think application lifecycle management, otherwise known as ALM. So you can manage changes across hundreds of reports being made by a large development team. Now, they're not necessarily to build in Power BI. Like, you don't have to have external tools. You don't have to use external tools, but they can make your life much easier. And the best part is that they're free to use. So there's no extra cost to use these external tools and make your Power BI even better. Okay. So let's meet today's external tools. We have first Dax Studio. We're going to review it and then go into it. We've got Bravo as well, Tabular Editor, and ALM Toolkit. These are all the logos so that you're familiar with them as you download them and start using them on your own. And we'll have the links to all of these tools in the slides as well, so you can look at them and know where to go to download these tools if you care to do so in the next few days. And I highly encourage that you do, because they are awesome. So first, let's go with Dax Studio. Now, it's a fantastic tool created by the folks at SQL BI. In fact, SQL BI is behind 3 of the tools that we're reviewing today. So thanks to them for creating these tools and making them free to use. With Dax Studio specifically, you can connect to a local Power BI model and update your model's DAX. You can run code to test before you place it in production. And it's also great for analyzing queries for optimization and exporting data to Excel or SQL for validation. This tool uses the DAX query language. Now, for those of you who don't know, DAX is the functional language of Power BI and other tools, but Power BI is what we're focusing on today. So it's the functional language of Power BI for writing measures, calculated columns, and calculated tables. Now, the query language is a little different from the functional language in Power BI Desktop. They're very similar, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we do a deep dive into Dax Studio. But before we do that deep dive, let's do a quick overview of Bravo. So Bravo is the newest tool and perhaps one of the coolest tools. In fact, today I got an email saying that Bravo version 1 is generally available now. So go ahead and check that out. That's awesome that it just happened to coincide with this class for today. So you can go download that tool, Bravo, for general availability today. Now, it is the king of report cleanup. Formatting, simplifying, and optimizing your model is an absolute breeze with this tool. You can format all of your DAX measures with 3 clicks. You can export data as well with Bravo, just like you can with Dax Studio, though it's more about some metadata. It includes metadata as well, like counts and of the tables of rows and that kind of thing, rather than just the raw data like Dax Studio does. So slightly different, but similar functionality. And lastly, you can easily create a robust date table, which is so essential for your Power BI models. Bravo makes that a breeze. Then we have Tabular Editor, which is one of my favorites, though picking a favorite is kind of like picking your favorite child. You love them all equally for different reasons. Tabular Editor has cool modeling capabilities like calculation groups, more on that in a bit, organizing your model into folders easily and being able to refresh individual partitions in a model with incremental refresh. That last one is really awesome for those of you with tons of data, like hundreds of millions of rows. If that's you, Tabular Editor is a tool you will want to have. And we'll demo that in a bit. And finally, we have ALM Toolkit. ALM, again, stands for Application Lifecycle Management. Essentially, it's like version control. kind of. Power BI isn't the best tool for collaborative development, but with Alm Toolkit, you can make it possible for multiple developers to work on the same tabular model and push updates to the Power BI service. It takes a well-defined process that may differ from company to company, but it works well with Alm Toolkit when it's implemented correctly. There are a few gotchas with Alm Toolkit that we're going to go over, so you can make an informed decision about using this tool. And with that, I'm going to get a drink of water, and then we'll dive into Dax Studio. Okay. Okay, so we know the 4 tools that we are going to talk about. We know a general overview of what each of those tools does. And now it's time to do a bit more of a deep dive and get into some demos. And first up again, we have Dax Studio. So let me go ahead and get out of Power BI, and I am going to open up this model, Power BI model. So there's a tab up here called External Tools, and if you don't see anything there, it's because you don't have any installed. But if you do have them installed, then you can pick it up and open your tool from there. As you can see, I have all 4 plus an additional one installed. I'm going to click on Dax Studio. And the nice thing about launching it from here is that it loads your data model already. So it's connected to the local model. I hit this connect button, and you can see that it's connected to this Power BI model I have open on my computer, which is super easy. Now, if you didn't have it installed or it wasn't showing up in Power BI, you didn't launch it from Power BI, that's okay. You can always hit that connect button and connect to any local model. So up in the menu, we've got run, we've got an output where you can have the output come as a file or as a grid, kind of like SQL Server Management Studio. You've got a query builder that you can write queries with. If you don't know Dax query language, you could format it. And then you've got server timings, which will be used for optimization. You can also export your data to CSV files and SQL tables, which can be useful. So with that, I'm going to take some code that I've written before this class. Here it is. And we're going to run this code and see what the results are like so you can get familiar with what Dax Studio can do. Hold on 1 second. People are saying that they can't see me demoing. Is anybody else having that same problem? You can see it? Okay, perfect. All right, so let's just keep going. Remember to reach out to JourneyTEAM support if you are having issues. Okay, so as I keep running through these, you can see that as I'm running through these, I've got different filters that I'm running. I've got this evaluate function. Now that evaluate expression is needed in order to write anything in Dax queries. I'm adding a filter here, you can see on the product category for bikes, and I can take that and put it inside, which I'll do in a minute. I can put it and create a calculated table inside my model. It's leveraging the relationships that are in my model, so I can use that just like I would in Power BI Desktop to write Dax, and use that here inside of Dax Studio to write similar code and see what the table is being generated as in the background. Because we don't always see what table is being generated when we're writing measures or well, really specifically measures. And so Dax Studio is a great way to visualize what's happening. So adding filters or using calculate table, you can copy that code. You can come here, go to modeling, create a new calculated table, and you can paste the code you write from Dax Studio or that you take from Power BI Desktop, and they're interchangeable. In a sense, you can see that this table that I am creating called bike sales, if I look at it, it returns the same 16,421 rows that I was returning in Dax Studio, which is awesome. It's nice to have that interoperability with the Dax code. So it is Dax, like Dax is a query language. We use it more as a functional language inside of Power BI, but it also is a query language that returns data that you can see here for our reports to use. Now, there are a few limitations to this. So if I try to run some of these, it will fail. And that's because you'll see I have a measure that's being used in here. And notice how it failed. It failed because the measure doesn't have context. and measures need context to calculate. Dax Studio doesn't really provide that context. And so by trying to run this Dax code, it just won't work. So there are a few little gotchas that you can learn more about in our intermediate Dax courses that we teach on JourneyTEAM University. But despite that limitation, being able to write Dax code like this is extremely useful for being able to write new code or troubleshoot. Now, I do want to show you something else that's really cool. If you're not super familiar with Dax, you can build a visualization, turn on the performance analyzer, start the recording, refresh visuals, and you can copy the query that is rendering the data for that visualization. And then you can run that inside of Dax Studio. You can see this is auto-generated Dax, so it's different than the Dax that you and I would write. And you can then turn on server timings and see what is slowing down the query. And that's super cool that you can do that. Like the ability to be able to paste and run server timings and optimize and see where your visualizations are slowing down is super awesome. Now, on this trace, it's going to give you some data about what's called the SE query or the FE. And what FE stands for is functional engine. SE stands for storage engine. There's another engine. It's like the Vertipack engine. There's all these engines going on in the background, and they're all doing work to give you your data. The important part is to know that you want low numbers here. If you see the SE queries being high, that means it's having to run multiple queries to render your data. The more of those there have to be, the more complex it is, and the longer it's going to take. So when it comes to optimizing, you can use data like this to kind of simplify and optimize your Dax code. We're not going to be able to go through how to optimize that code. I'm just here to show you that the external tool provides that functionality for you so that you can see opportunities for optimization. I also did want to take a quick minute to tell you that more visualizations means more Dax queries, which means potentially slower reports. So you don't necessarily want to have a ton of visualizations on your report because it might slow it down. Moving on, you can also define measures, which is great. It shows you the Dax that makes up the measure, but then you can define dependencies for that measure. So let's say you write a base measure, then you have another measure that refers to that base measure, and maybe that cascades down to 5 other measures. You could define all of that here in Dax Studio. So you can see when you update a measure, what the impact is going to be to your report. Is it going to change, or is it going to break anything? Is it going to change these other measures that I did not intend for it to change? And so Dax Studio allows you to be able to define all of these dependent measures or dependent objects upon that measure that you're looking at or calculated column, which is so useful because it allows you to just know before everything breaks, before you change something, what might break. So definitely come into Dax Studio and use that dependent measure, show objects that reference it. Use that inside of Dax Studio to get an idea before you change, especially if it's a report you inherit. That'll be extremely useful so that you don't cause any disruptions in your reporting production line. Oh, and if again, just as a reminder, as I move into the next tool, if there are questions, please feel free to put those questions in the chat and we will have time to cover those at the end. I know I'm going through these quickly and I'm sure you have lots of questions that are coming up. So put those questions in the chat and we'll spend as much time as possible at the end going over those. Okay, so that was Dax Studio. That was a quick review of Dax Studio. Again, just as a reminder, Dax queries are run in the background to populate your visualizations. That's using the Dax query language. Performance Analyzer allows you to be able to get that Dax query for the visualization and check and optimize it to see maybe if it's slowing down your report. It also provides a great sandbox for creating, testing, and optimizing your Dax, both for measures, calculated columns, and calculated tables. Now remember that the output of Dax query in Dax Studio has to be a table. You cannot evaluate a single measure because a measure needs context. So if you just evaluated a measure, it would error out. Remember, it has to return a table. So that's Dax Studio. And now it's time to move on to Bravo. Take a quick drink first. All right, one external tool down, 3 more to go. Let's move on to Bravo, the newest tool of the bunch. Bravo is super cool. It allows you, well, let me exit out of here and get into my Power BI file. So first, in order to launch it, just like I launched the Dax Studio tool, I go to the External Tools tab in Power BI and click on the tool there. Now, if you don't see it, it might be because you just downloaded the tool and you need to close and relaunch Power BI, then it will show up. So as always, you can also open the tool up separately and connect to the model rather than having it automatically connected. So here is Bravo. You see my 4 options on the side: export data, manage dates, format DAX, and analyze the model. Let's talk about each of these quickly, and then we'll show some examples. Export data. So this is a little different than Dax Studio. The export data here, you can select tables and then go to export them, and it'll have metadata. Manage dates allows you to create a date table, formatting DAX, 3 clicks to format all of your DAX, and then analyze models. You can see which columns are taking up the most space in your model. And then if you're not using that column, delete it. And the model tries to tell you which ones are being used and which aren't. It's not perfect though, and we'll go over that. In the settings, you can change things like dark mode. You can connect to the Power BI service, as I'll show here. When you hit a new connection, you can do open files, or you can connect to datasets on powerbi.com, which is awesome. It just opens up a excuse me, it opens up a authentication window, signs into your Power BI service, and you're good to go. You can connect to a data set. So those are different ways to connect. And now let's show you a little more about each of these individual pieces. So the export, there's not much more to show there. Manage dates, there's a lot to show. Date tables, you absolutely should have in your Power BI models. If you do not have a date table, highly recommend it. You can see, I'm going to show you the code now just for a very simple date table. This is the DAX code. Very simple, not very big table. It took a little bit to write this, and maybe some of you are looking at that code and thinking, that's scary. And that's what Bravo is for, because it allows you to have a great date table without having to write all the DAX code in order to generate it. There are a lot of different options here. Just clicky, clicky, draggy, droppy options. You can select whether you want to have your minimum date, your maximum date based on specific columns, what holidays to include if you want a holidays table, because everybody has different holidays that they get off for their metrics. And then you can add time intelligence. So you can say, I want all my measures to automatically have time intelligence created for them. So cool. And once you have all those selections done, you can get a preview of the 4 tables that will be generated by this application. And then once you hit that button, apply to the model, boom, it's done. And it generated all of those date tables for me. Now, in order to see them, you'll probably have to refresh the page, or refresh your data model, excuse me. And then notice how I have a few more tables there. And there's some great DAX that looks very intimidating, but that's okay because you didn't have to write it. And you can manage it inside of the Bravo tool. Bravo. We've got holidays, we've got the holiday definition, and this is where you would change the code if you had different holidays. So maybe you're in a different country, you have different holidays. Maybe your company doesn't, the holidays that you want recognized are only like the 4th of July or the big holidays rather than some smaller holidays. That's where you could change all that. That's date tables. Let's move on to DAX formatting. And I know I'm moving quickly. Thanks for keeping up with me. So in your model, after you analyze it, it'll show you all the measures that you have created. Now, I've only got one. I'm going to go create another one just so we can see this in practice. So let me copy this and generate another measure. I'm actually going to break the formatting quite a bit. You can see this looks really ugly right now. Granted, it is small, but it just doesn't look as good as it could. And when I refresh, you'll see after I analyze it, oh, it's highlighting it as a measure to format. That's great. I've got a measure I can format. You can actually click that button right there, and that will filter it down to only the measures that are not formatted. Now I'm going to create another measure so we can see how this works. Here we go, typing in my DAX. We're just going to do a quick sum. Now that is formatted. It's easy to format, not complicated. And you'll see, oh, well, it's not according to the formatting, the default formatting that's here. So I can select them both, or select one, format it. And now you can see one is formatted, one is not. And I can filter down to just the ones that aren't formatted, select it, format it, done. Now I could do that all at once. I could just click all measures, format them, and be done with it. That's the 3 clicks. It's really cool that in addition to the formatting, you can also see which ones have errors. And if you click on a measure, you can see what the DAX code is. And if it was unformatted, you can see what the formatting preview would be. So you can see, oh, do I like this formatting? Because everybody has a slightly different, flavor of formatting that they might have. And you can change that in the settings for the DAX formatter. You can say, oh, I would rather have, not to have spaces between my parentheses. And that's where you would change in here in the options under formatting. You can make changes to that to have the formatting be what you prefer. Now, I will say some formatting is better than no formatting. And so you don't have to use a default, but just use something. Analyzing the model. Let me just refresh this real quick. You can see we've got some, like email address. That's a big column. It's taking up 3% of our whole model, which granted isn't a ginormous amount, but it's still significant. And it's 3% that we maybe could save. Now, remember, with Pro, you have a 1 GB limit for what you can upload. With Premium, you have a 10 GB limit for what you can upload from the desktop to the service. So reducing the size of your model is important, not just for performance, but also for functionality, for publishing. So using this tool, now it's not perfect, but it can help a lot for identifying potential columns to delete. Email address, I'm not going to use that in this report, so I can go ahead and delete the email address from my data model, and that will save me 3%, in this case 1.02 megabytes, and which will in turn help my model perform better. It won't be a noticeable difference with this small model here, but especially for those of you that have big models, you will notice a gain when you get rid of a large amount of your data, potentially by doing this. So I'm actually going to open, you can see I'm in Power Query now. I can go to the email and just remove it. Right click, remove. And now it's gone. Close and apply. It'll refresh that table. Then we'll go back to Bravo and refresh that, and now it's gone, and my model is that much smaller, 1.02 megabytes smaller, which is great. Now, I would not willy-nilly just go delete every single column that it says is yellow here that could be deleted, because it's not perfect at knowing which columns are being used for visualizations and which aren't, especially if you have an underlying data set that multiple reports are using. You won't have all the visualizations in that data set that the reports have, and so if you delete something, it may affect that later on. Whew, that was a lot to go over, and that's Bravo. Really, in a really quick, speedy review, that is Bravo. Just to review, we've got what Bravo can do. It can format all of your DAX in a tabular model, including measures, calculated columns, etc. It's easy to add a robust DAX table, DAX date table with included time intelligence if you want to include it for your selected measures. And then you can also review and clean your tabular model by removing unused columns. And I just want to emphasize this because I'm afraid that some people might go and just start deleting columns that the Bravo tool says to delete. Wait, before you do that, please do a thorough check of your data model and maybe use Dax Studio to find dependencies there. Just check and test, make a copy of the report, and then and the other reports that it connects to, make sure that it doesn't affect anything after, like, you remove it in that duplicated report before you duplicate it from the production level or the production version of the Power BI report, okay? Because you do not want to break your reports and have your users' experience interrupted. That's very frustrating and can sometimes kill adoption. So just be careful with it. It's a great tool. Be careful and cautious as you use it. All right, time to move on to Tabular Editor. It's my favorite for a specific reason. We'll see as we get into the demo. So let's just jump into it. Here we go. Tabular Editor is, again, going to the Power BI model, going to our, our external tools and launching Tabular Editor. It can do some really cool things. Now, the functionality that I'm going to show you here is a lot easier to do inside of Power BI now than it was a little while ago, and that is creating display folders. it's a lot easier to do in Power BI modeling view now, but it is really cool to do it here as well, especially because there are additional things Tabular Editor can do. And so while you're here, you might as well organize your measures. You can see here, I've got my data model. I've got all my measures in my measure table. I can look at the DAX. I can see what it is, format it if I want to, one by one, not quite as cool as the Bravo can format everything. But in this case, I can also add display folders and call this my sales metrics. And then after I do that on one measure, I can select multiple measures, click and drag them into that folder, which is awesome. It's super easy to create the folders and super easy to create subfolders with additional subfolders. We'll see that in the time intelligence folder in just a minute. But you can see all those measures that I have after I refresh my data set. Sometimes when you save it in Tabular Editor, it does it automatically. Other times you have to refresh your data model. And then after you refresh, in just a second, here we go, boom, there it is. Now you can see my display folder, which is great. It's just really nice when you have a lot of measures to be able to organize them like that. Make it easier for you and your report consumers. You can see these were the automatic time intelligence measures that were created by Bravo. Created a lot of cool subfolders. Subfolders can be created without Tabular Editor, but this just makes it so easy. And it's nice to see them visually like this. So that's display folders, and it is great. Let's talk about some other things that Tabular Editor can do as well. So Tabular Editor, in addition to creating display folders, you can also right-click on the tables and create what's called a calculation group. Calculation groups you may have not heard of. They're not used as often as I think they could be, but what they can do is it allows you to have, if you saw earlier when actually you can see on the page here, I have sales year to date, sales month to date, last year to date, and quarter to date. Those are all separate measures. A calculation group, like the one I just created called Sales Time Intelligence, I can have a single measure and then use a calculation group with calculation items to apply those time intelligence functions like last year to date, month to date, year to date, and quarter to date without having to create multiple measures. And that's nice so that you don't have to write as much DAX. I mean, you still have to write it here in the calculation group. I've got a little cheat sheet here you can see, but it makes it function in a cool way inside of a visualization. You can see all the DAX here that I've got. So this is what it would do if I wrote separate measures and then if I wrote a calculation group. Notice this new function you may have not seen before called selected measure. That essentially says when I include this in a visualization, I can, whatever measure I put on the visualization, it will apply this DAX to it. It'll do total year to date, total quarter to date, total month to date for that selected measure. So let's put that here in our calculation group and see it in practice. I've got my year to date, and then I right click, create a new calculation item, and call this one quarter to date. Copy the quarter to date code. Now I don't need the name, I only need the stuff or the code after the equal sign. So I'll get rid of that. And now that check mark I'm checking, that ensures the DAX is written correctly. There's no IntelliSense in Tabular Editor, which is a little frustrating, but you can check your code and make sure it's written correctly. And I usually write my code first in Power BI Desktop, make sure it works right because IntelliSense, and then bring it back here and paste it into Tabular Editor with selected measure. So there we go. Let's do one more. Last year to date. Copy that code. And then we'll put it in. And now after I check all the DAX, I can save this. And you may need to refresh your data model. So we'll go and refresh the data model. So we don't see it quite yet. Refresh. And there we go. You'll notice at the very bottom, sales time intelligence. So it adds a table. And I've got this name column. You can change that if you would like by double clicking on it. You can call it time period. Let's do that. Now I'll save that and refresh my model again. Notice how I right clicked and refreshed just that table. So nice, because sometimes your refreshes take a long time. So let's create a table here. And I'm going to show you that the data is the same, whether I use different measures for the year to date, quarter to date, month to date, or I use the calculation groups. This will help, I think, build some trust in the functionality of calculation groups and what it's doing in the background. So here I have sales. I'm going to add the month to date, quarter to date, year to date, last year to date. You can see all the numbers there. So I'll minimize or make this a little smaller. Let's copy it and paste it. And now, instead of using the different measures, I'm just going to pull in one measure, the sales amount measure, and then my time period as columns. And you can see, comparing the two, they're not in the same order, but the data is the same. And I can actually change the order inside of Tabular Editor as well. If I go down to click on one of these, see the ordinal column? If I change that ordinal number, they're all the same right now, so it's alphabetical, but I can change that to be in the order I want it to. So it sorts correctly. Maybe I want this one to be, let's see, oh, it automatically fills it in when you write them in. So I've got 1, 2, or 0, 1, 2, 3. Now I can change the last year to date to 3 or 4. Let's click in there, make that 4, and that puts that after month to date. So now save in Tabular Editor, and then refresh your model. And we'll see that it now shows up in the correct order, or at least the same order that I want to see it above. And all the numbers look the same. Hurrah! Isn't that great? You can have one single measure up with different filters using calculation groups. And this has a lot of different applications. There are so many cool things that you can do with this. I have a client that I was able to write some code for so that it can show, based on a slice where they have selected, it shows different like underlying metrics for whatever they have selected, whether it's more granular or less granular. Calculation groups can do some really, really cool things. And I can add more calculation items if I had to do maybe weeks. Maybe I cared about weeks. Maybe I cared about 2 years ago as well, comparing to that. So a lot of different cool things you can do with calculation groups. Okay, so now I'm going to copy and show how you can connect, not to just a local model, but connect to a model in the cloud. I click the button next to the folder open, I paste that, that's what I got from the workspace. It'll have me log in, and then you can see I have some data sets that I can connect to in the cloud. And when I go to these data sets, now this data set has incremental refresh on it. Incremental refresh, again, is just allows you to, with really big data sets, you can refresh only the latest data as opposed to all of the data. And so you can see all the different partitions here that were generated when I published this report. That's the partition schema. And sometimes if you have so much data, you actually have to load the partitions one by one as opposed to loading everything all at once. And Tabular Editor can help you do that. So here I've got this other model. This one uses hybrid tables, incremental refresh, and direct query. And so let me go show you the settings. Now, hybrid tables, quick caveat, those are premium only, but the setup is the same. 5 years of data, last 30 days. You can see how those correlate here with the partitions in that you're seeing here in Tabular Editor. And then it goes by every day. Those are the 30 days. And then the direct query part, that's the one with the onward. That's the direct query portion that comes with the hybrid table. Again, hybrid tables require premium. If you don't have that, then you'll just have you won't have an onward partition. Okay, moving on, let me open up SQL Server Management Studio. SQL Server Management Studio, I am connected to that same premium workspace. This is all using what's called the XMLA endpoint, which you have to enable. But once I do, I can click on the hybrid table and then look at the partition schema. And you can see how many rows each of them have, which is awesome. Now this is dummy data, so that's why you see a lot of 346. But I can then go through and select only the partitions of the data that I want to refresh. Well, I'm going to select these 3, hit OK, and then it's going to process that and refresh the data just for those time periods according to the incremental refresh policy that I have applied to this data set, which is great. If you have hundreds of millions of rows, you'll probably need to do this when you publish, because when you publish and you have premium, you can load up to 100 gigabytes or more, depending on the premium license you have, into the cloud. And Tabular Editor can help you populate that data when a normal refresh might fail or just take forever to run, but likely will just fail. So in that case, you can publish the report, but data doesn't load until you have the refresh policy applied. Tabular Editor allows you to connect to a data set and apply the refresh policy like I just showed you, and then it will show up in the cloud. Now you'll see zeros everywhere for the partitions when you do that initially and haven't done the first refresh in the cloud, but then you can populate it in SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, whew, that was a lot and some pretty advanced stuff. Now, if you don't have a ton of data, you might not ever need to use incremental refresh, or you could. It still can improve performance, especially on your refresh side. If you need data that's refreshed a lot, incremental refresh can help a lot, and Tabular Editor really can help you make that performant. Okay, so just one quick drink. So, in review, Tabular Editor, you can easily organize your measures and calculated columns in display folders. I like doing it in Tabular Editor, even though you can do it in Power BI. Tabular Editor is just, it's a better experience in my opinion. You can create calculation groups to streamline standard calculation variations for multiple users. Again, the most common use case for this is time intelligence. I want to have a measure that is calculated month to date, quarter to date, year to date, previous year to date, 2 years ago to date, whatever. You can write those in a calculation group, put them in a visualization as the axis or the legend, and it will apply that to your measure. And then for large data sets, hundreds of millions of rows, or even if you just have millions of rows, you can use Tabular Editor to populate incremental refresh partitions. We'll apply and then populate those incremental refresh partitions using the XMLA endpoint. Again, that is only premium capacity or premium per user. Power BI Premium does allow some cool things to happen. But for those of you that are only using Pro, that's okay. Tabular Editor still is a great tool for you as well. All right. Again, keep putting your questions in the chat. We will definitely have some time to cover them at the end. The show must go on. Alm Toolkit is our final external tool that we're going to review today. Now, there are more that we aren't going to have time to cover. And if you have questions about them, please feel free to ask us. We are more than happy to help. I'm just trying to cover these 4 because they are the most common and, in my opinion, the most useful, the ones I use most often. Alm Toolkit is extremely useful. Again, if you remember from earlier when we talked about the review, it is really useful for what's called application lifecycle management. That's what ALM stands for, application lifecycle management. When you think of that, it's more of like a coding term when you have a dev, test, and production environments. Maybe some people use DevOps or GitHub in order to do a similar management, application lifecycle management. And so this tool is that methodology applied to Power BI, which is really great. And let's see how it works. Now, the cool thing with XMLA at the endpoint is that it allows you to do things like this, where you can use the XMLA endpoint to connect to local and models in the cloud and see the differences between the two of those. So in here, you can see I'm connected to a local model and I have the cloud model, one in the Power BI service connected. It's analyzing them now and it's going to highlight any differences. You can see it defines the code and I have a difference. Oh, I didn't have this one created in the cloud version. I can publish that change to the cloud. That's what the validate button does. It makes sure everything works just fine after you validate all the measures and all the changes. Then you can click the update button and that will push your code changes up to the data model in the cloud, which is awesome. Normally that's done by publishing in a Power BI desktop app. But what that doesn't do is that publishing doesn't allow you to see the differences, whereas Alm Toolkit allows you to see the differences and review the differences before you publish. You can also select only a certain subset of the differences to publish to the cloud, which is awesome. And then let's say that somebody else on your team is using the same file and making updates. That means both of you can be working on different parts of the report. I can push my updates through Alm Toolkit. Another person can push updates through the Alm Toolkit. And then I can see the differences in what they're doing and they can see what I'm doing, which is awesome. And now you can see the differences are gone because I published those. It also works the other way where you can connect to the cloud and push updates from the cloud down to your local model, which is awesome. So now I'm going to add another measure just so we can compare and see the difference. So I'm going to do average of JT hours, great. Let me save that. So my local model updates, go to Alm Toolkit and refresh. Yeah, let me compare. You always have to hit the compare button again. Let it load. And now you can see I've got this new measure that I created. It's missing in the target, which is the target again is the cloud. You can see the Dax code below. I can validate it and then update it, and it will push that to the cloud. Wait for that to run. There we go. And close. Perfect. So then it updates the comparison. We can see that everything matches. You can look and see the code. It matches. Hooray, we're good. I can come to the cloud. Now, this is one of the gotchas of the Alm Toolkit. Normally, you can download a report. Notice how I get an error. The file cannot be downloaded because it's been altered through the XMLA endpoint. So what you gain with the ability to do collaboration for your development of Power BI, you lose the ability to download the copy from the cloud. Now, for some people, that's a small loss. Other people view that data set in the cloud as like a backup where you can download the most recent version from, and you'll lose that ability if you use Alm Toolkit or if you use Tabular Editor to do what I showed you earlier, because that's still using the XMLA endpoint. So just know that both will cause this error to come up. So I want you to just be informed so that you can make a good decision when using Alm Toolkit. I think the advantages are more than the disadvantages, but you still need to know what the disadvantages are so that you can plan around them and mitigate them. And so again, it uses XMLA endpoint, so you need to have that enabled and have premium in order to get this to work. Now, have backups of your files somewhere else when it comes to these. I highly recommend SharePoint or OneDrive to store your Power BI files so that you don't have to worry about the Power BI service being your backup, because using the XMLA endpoint will make that not possible. But still, really cool that you can do this comparison and use Alm Toolkit for your application lifecycle management. Quick review here of Alm Toolkit. Compare data sets on your device and in the Power BI service. So that means you can compare two files locally. You can compare a file locally to a file online. You can compare two online files. All of that can be done with Alm Toolkit. You can also implement enterprise application lifecycle management practices. So for big companies, this can be really great, even for small companies, but mostly for like enterprise level, large companies, lots of people developing all at once. Collaboration is needed. Alm Toolkit can help a lot. So you can have multiple users develop on a single file. And just a reminder on that gotcha, once you modify a data set with Alm Toolkit or Tabular Editor using the XMLA endpoint, you cannot download it from the Power BI service. Just know that. Okay, we have reviewed all of these 4 commonly used external tools. Now, what's next? For you, it could be this Power BI health check. We offer a Power BI health check where we can come in and analyze your Power Query, analyze your data model, analyze your visualizations, and just make sure that you are in accordance with best practices in Power BI. It's a self-evaluation from experts. We combine with you and work with you to make sure that we're analyzing the right pieces of your Power BI tenant so that you can make sure that what you're doing in Power BI is right, that you're doing it right from the beginning, laying a strong foundation with Power BI. So if you're interested in the Power BI health check, please reach out to us, let us know, and we'd be more than happy to reach out to you. Other than that, thank you so much for joining. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll let Jake say any last things. Oh, actually, I think Jake might say this, but just to emphasize, we've got a survey.
Yep. I'll be adding that here in just a minute.
Okay. So yeah, with that, let's jump into some questions. I think there might be some in the chat. Okay, a few honorable mentions so Ryan Miller says, what are a few honorable mention applications that would be worth looking into outside the 4 you reviewed? That's a good question. You might have noticed in the demos, I had one that was called Power BI Helper. That one, if you don't want to use, well, first off, Alm Toolkit requires premium because of the XMLA endpoint. Power BI Helper can allow you to compare files locally, even if you just have Pro. So that receives an honorable mention because not everybody uses Premium. And so the Alm Toolkit, while awesome, just won't work for everybody. So the Power BI, let me type that in the chat, Power BI Helper. It's not as streamlined as the tools I showed you today, but it can work. Little more confusing, but it can help you compare two local Power BI files. Good question, Ryan. Okay, got another question. Do you have links where we can get these applications? Yes. Quick note on the Tabular Editor. It looks like you have to put your email in order to download it. You can just uncheck the two options, keep me informed and send me SQL BI promotions, and then you won't need to put your email in for that. So just know that. And then last one, Alm Toolkit. Now I do want to let you know that when I downloaded the Alm Toolkit app, oh, it looks like SQL BI is behind Alm Toolkit too. Okay, cool. When I downloaded it, Edge was like, "Are you sure this is a safe application?" And yes, it is. I have it downloaded on my machine and it was fine. I had to say like keep download and then was able to get it installed. So for those of you that have IT that you have to go through to get downloads, just maybe let them know or have them go through the approval process. That just happened to me and it may happen to you too. Those are the 4 links though for the tools. If you care to go look at them and download them, highly encouraged it. Remember, after you download them, if you have Power BI open, you'll need to close and relaunch it, and then they'll show up in that external tools tab. Good question, Ryan. Okay, Kevin says, can you repost the link for the survey? Yes. Thank you for filling out that survey. It really will help me as I try to be the best instructor about Power BI analytics possible. So thank you for that. It'll help us be better so we can better serve you. I think that about closes our session then. Thank you all again for coming. If you need a minute to fill the survey out, go ahead. Otherwise, stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon.